The screen fades in from black. For a moment, there's nothing but silence. Then, a single sound, the creak of a door, slow, deliberate, like the breath before confession. On March 14th, 2019, at approximately 6:47 a.m., something happened in a quiet suburban neighborhood that would shake an entire community to its core. A family of four, gone, vanished, disappeared without leaving behind a single logical explanation. No ransom note, no signs of struggle, no bodies, no goodbye. For 17 days, the disappearance of the Hartwell family remained one of the most baffling cases that investigators had ever encountered. 12 investigators, 48 surveillance cameras, 260 hours of footage. And yet, for 17 days, they found absolutely nothing. But here's what will shock you. When they finally did find something, when investigators uncovered the truth about that fateful night, they weren't prepared for what they discovered. The answer wasn't just surprising. It was devastating. It was calculated. It was deliberate in ways that nobody could have anticipated. This is the story of what happened to the Hartwell family. And this is what investigators found that left them completely speechless. Let's go back to March 13th, 2019, the night before it all fell apart. It was a Thursday evening in the riverside neighborhoods of Portland, Oregon, the kind of place where people leave their garage doors open a little longer than necessary, where neighbors know each other by name, where nothing bad ever seems to happen. These were the streets where the Hartwell family lived. Not famous, not wealthy beyond measure, just normal. The Hartwell household consisted of four people. Richard Hartwell, 47 years old, a structural engineer who worked for a mid-sized firm downtown. Reliable, punctual, the kind of guy who showed up to work on time every single day for 19 consecutive years without taking a sick day. His co-workers described him as quiet, professional, someone who kept himself but was always willing to help. His wife, Jennifer Hartwell, 45 years old, a part-time librarian at the local public library and a volunteer at the community center. Everyone knew Jennifer. She was on the PTA board, organized a neighborhood book club, and was the type of person who remembered people's birthdays. Her best friend of 20 years, Carol Henderson, would later describe her as the most genuine person I've ever known. Their two children, Emma, 16 years old, a junior at Lincoln High School. She was an honors student, played clarinet in the school orchestra, and had dreams of attending Stanford University. By all accounts, she was a typical teenager, sometimes moody, often glued to her phone, but fundamentally a good kid. Her teachers noted her as bright, articulate, and capable of great things. And then there was James, 14 years old, the youngest, a freshman. He was a quiet one, the introspective type who preferred video games and science fiction novels to parties and social media. His geometry teacher would later say, James was the kind of student who listened instead of talked. But when he did speak, you listened. On the evening of March 13th, this family did what they did most evenings. They came home. Richard arrived back from work at 5:43 p.m. We know this because his key card recorded his exit from his office building. Jennifer was already home, having finished her shift at the library at 4:30. Emma had soccer practice until 5:15, arriving home around 5:45. James had skateboard home from school, arriving at approximately 4:10. Around 6:15 p.m., according to the family's Ring doorbell camera footage, the last footage of the family that would ever be recorded, Richard pulled into the driveway. He carried his briefcase in one hand, his phone in the other. He looked tired, the way people look at the end of a long day. But he was smiling, not a forced smile, a real, genuine smile, like he was happy to be home. Jennifer met him at the door. The footage shows her hugging him. It's a normal moment, domestic, unremarkable, the kind of moment that happens in thousands of homes every evening. But watching it now, knowing what would happen in the next few hours, this footage becomes something else entirely. It becomes the last moment, the final frame, the goodbye nobody knew was coming. Dinner time, 6:50 p.m. The family gathered around their dining table. Jennifer had made pasta with a homemade marinara sauce. Simple comfort food, Through the front window, the one with the sheer curtains that allowed just enough visibility, you could see them, all four of them, seated, eating, talking, or at least that's what they appear to be doing. At 8:12 p.m., there's a Ring doorbell footage. The exterior camera, the one mounted above the front door, a delivery truck. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would suggest anything was wrong. The delivery person left a package on the porch. A package that would arrive for Richard every Thursday at this time. Office supplies, printer paper, ink cartridges, completely routine. At 9:30 p.m., someone recorded footage from the Hartwell residence. Their own internal security camera, one mounted in the living room corner. All four family members were still inside. The house lights were on. Everything appeared normal. The TV flickered in the background. Someone was walking around the kitchen. Life was continuing as it always did. By 10:47 p.m., the last person to see any of them alive, Marilyn Cross, a neighbor who was getting her cat back inside her house, observed the Hartwell's house. She would later testify that all the lights were on, everything seemed fine. I thought about waving to Jennifer through the window, but I was tired, so I just went inside. No one saw them after that. No one would see them again for 17 days. Friday morning, March 14th, 7 a.m. The sun was rising over the Riverside neighborhood. Another day beginning. People were getting ready for work. Kids were dragging themselves out of bed. Alarm clocks were ringing. Coffee makers were brewing. Everything was normal. Everything was normal except for one thing. At 7:15 a.m., Teresa Morrow, who worked as a substitute teacher, was driving home after dropping her daughter off at school. She passed the Hartwell house. She noticed something odd. The garage door was open, not just slightly ajar, completely open, wide open, and the car that was normally parked inside was gone. Teresa thought it was strange because Jennifer had told her just a day before that they were planning a quiet weekend at home. Something about Emma having rehearsal for the spring orchestra concert and James having a math test on Monday. They weren't planning to go anywhere, but Teresa didn't think much of it. People change plans all the time. Maybe they decided to run early errands. Maybe Richard had forgotten something at work and had to go back. There were 1,000 explanations. None of them seemed worth worrying about. At 8:45 a.m., Carol Henderson, Jennifer's best friend, sent a text message. She wanted to confirm plans for their weekly coffee date, which was supposed to happen that Friday afternoon at 2 p.m. The text read, "Can't wait to see you today. Did you want to try that new place downtown?" No response. By 10:30 a.m., Carol tried calling. The phone rang twice and then went to voicemail. Jennifer's voicemail message was cheerful. "Hi, this is Jennifer Hartwell. I can't take your call right now, but please leave a message and I'll get back to you." Carol left a message. "Hey Jen, it's me. Just making sure we're still on for this afternoon. Give me a call back." She wasn't worried yet. Jennifer often had her phone on silent during work. She'd call back later. By noon, Carol tried again. Still no answer. Now she was starting to feel something. Not panic exactly, but a creeping sense of unease. Because Jennifer always responded. Jennifer always called people back within the hour. That was just who she was. At 12:47 p.m., Carol texted Richard's phone. No response. She texted Emma. Nothing. She even tried calling the house phone. That rang and then went to a voicemail that had never been set up. By 1:30 p.m., Carol made a decision that would set the entire investigation into motion. She drove to the Hartwell house. When she pulled up the curb, the first thing she noticed was the same thing Teresa Morrow had noticed. The garage door was open. The driveway was empty. But it was more than that. There was a sense of wrongness about the house. The kind of wrongness that your body registers before your mind can process it. Carol walked up to the front door and knocked. Waited. Nothing. She walked around to the side gate and found it unlocked. She let herself into the backyard. She knocked on the back door. Still nothing. Every window she passed. She peered inside. The house appeared to be empty. Not just empty as in nobody's home. Empty as in hollow. Abandoned. Wrong. Carol pulled her phone out and called the police. "I need to report something," she said to the dispatcher. "My best friend and her family, I think something is wrong. Very wrong." Detective Marcus Williams arrived at the Hartwell residence at 2:13 p.m. on Friday, March 14th. He was a 24-year veteran of the Portland Police Department, someone who had seen a lot of things in his career, but nothing quite prepared him for what he found. The front door was locked. The back door was locked. But when Officer Saracen arrived with a warrant, obtained within 30 minutes, an unusually fast process indicating how seriously they were taking this initial report, they let themselves in. The moment they crossed the threshold into the Hartwell home, Detective Williams knew something was profoundly wrong. The house was clean, immaculately clean, too clean, the kind of clean that suggests someone had deliberately erased all evidence of daily living. Dishes were washed and dried, put away. There was no clutter on the counters. The living room floor had been vacuumed. The bathrooms were spotless. But more than that, it was empty. The house was simply gone of its inhabitants. No coats hanging on the rack. No shoes by the door. No keys on the key hooks. No backpacks. No school papers. No nothing. It was as if the family had simply ceased to exist within those walls. The first officer through the door, Officer Chun, immediately noticed the bedrooms. All four of them. The parents' room, Emma's room, James's room, a guest room. Every single bed was made. No pajamas on the floor. No dirty laundry piles. Nothing personal. Nothing lived in. It's like they never even slept there, Officer Chin would later recount in her statement. But here's where it got truly strange. In the master bedroom closet, Detective Williams found something. Their suitcases. All of them. Not packed. Just sitting there. Unused. If the family had gone somewhere, where were their suitcases? In the kitchen, on the counter, there was a stack of mail. Not opened. Not touched. Bills from the previous week. A magazine subscription. A notice from Emma's school. All just sitting there, untouched. But the strangest discovery came when Officer Chen was checking the second floor. She found Emma's bedroom door locked from the inside. When they opened it, they found a room in disarray. This was the only room in the entire house that wasn't immaculate. The bed was unmade. Clothes were scattered on the floor. It looked lived in. It looked normal. But the door had been locked from inside, and Emma was nowhere to be found. Why would she lock her door? Detective Williams asked more to himself than to anyone else. By 3 p.m., the entire house had been photographed, cataloged, and documented. The basement was empty. The attic was empty. Nothing in the garage except an oil stain where the car normally sat. By 4 p.m., the forensics team had arrived. They began dusting for fingerprints, looking for any trace of evidence. Hair samples, fibers, anything that could tell them what had happened here. By 6:30 p.m., Detective Williams was standing in the Hartwell living room, staring at the wall where family photos hung. Photos of happier times. The family at Christmas. Emma's 16th birthday party. James smiling in front of the Golden Gate Bridge during a family vacation. Richard and Jennifer on their 20-year wedding anniversary cruise. "Where are you?" he whispered, looking at the photos as if they might answer. They didn't. As the investigation intensified, Detective Williams and his team began building a profile of the family. Who were the Hartwells? What kind of people were they? Because in cases like this, the answer is everything. The investigation revealed that Richard and Jennifer Hartwell had met in college. Both attended the University of Oregon. Richard was studying engineering. Jennifer was studying library science. They met at a student organization event. Neither could remember exactly which one. They started dating in their junior year. They were together for 5 years before Richard proposed. They had gotten married in a small ceremony with just close family and friends. A simple wedding. Nothing extravagant. Richard's career had been steady and unremarkable. He had worked for the same firm for 19 years. His boss described him as reliable, quiet, professional. They had never known him to take more than 1 sick day per year. He had never had any conflicts with co-workers. He received solid performance reviews. He was by all accounts a model employee who kept his head down and did his job well. But interviews with his co-workers revealed something more interesting. Several people mentioned that Richard kept his personal life very separate from his work life. They knew almost nothing about his family. Some co-workers admitted they hadn't even known he had children until the disappearance was plastered across the news. One co-worker, David Park, said something that would stick with Detective Williams. Richard was fine to work with, but he was like, I don't know, like there were layers to him. Like there was a lot going on beneath the surface that he didn't share with anyone. Jennifer, by contrast, was much more open. She was known in the community. The librarians who worked with her at the Portland Public Library all spoke highly of her. She was organized, kind, and had this way of making everyone feel welcome. One co-worker named Susan Martinez said, Jennifer was the kind of person who would notice if you were having a bad day and ask you about it. And she actually cared about the answer. She wasn't just being polite. She genuinely cared. But even Jennifer had secrets, or so it appeared. When Detective Williams interviewed Carol Henderson more deeply, Carol revealed something she initially hadn't mentioned. About 6 months ago, Carol said, Jennifer told me something. She said things weren't great at home. She didn't elaborate. I didn't push. But I remember her saying, sometimes you realize you're living with someone you don't really know. And then she changed the subject, and we never talked about it again. This revelation sent the investigation in a new direction. What wasn't great at home? Had there been marital problems? Was Richard having an affair? Was Jennifer? There were suddenly questions that needed answers. The children painted a different picture. Emma, according to her teachers, was a model student, well-liked by her peers. Not popular exactly, but respected. She had a small circle of close friends. Her best friend, Madison Chun, said Emma seemed happy. She was excited about applying to colleges. Madison said she was planning to visit Stanford in the summer. She had her life all figured out. But when Detective Williams interviewed Emma's other classmates, a more nuanced picture emerged. Emma had gone through what one girl called a weird phase. About 4 months prior, Emma had started acting differently. She was quieter. She seemed withdrawn. In lunch, she would sit by herself instead of with her friend group. One girl mentioned seeing her crying in the bathroom once. But it passed, the girl said. After like 2 months, she seemed to get better. She was back to normal. James presented a different enigma entirely. He was quieter by nature. His teachers described him as smart, capable, but quiet. Too quiet, one teacher said. He never raised his hand. He never participated. You could look at his tests and papers, and you'd know he understood the material, but he never wanted to be noticed in class. But his parents' friends noted something else. At a dinner party about 8 months before the disappearance, James had been there. One of Richard and Jennifer's friends, Robert Simmons, said, James was sitting in the corner most of the evening. I tried to talk to him about something. I think it was about science or video games or something, and he seemed almost afraid. Not scared of me, but just scared in general, like he was carrying something heavy. The more Detective Williams dug into the background of the Hartwell family, the more he realized that while they appeared normal from the outside, there had been undercurrents, tensions, problems, things that weren't visible at first glance, but that became apparent upon examination. The question became, had those tensions escalated? Had they reached a breaking point? And if so, what had happened as a result? As the investigation progressed into its second day, forensic analysts began discovering something peculiar. The house had been deliberately cleaned. Not just normal household cleaning. Forensic-level cleaning. The kitchen sink still showed traces of bleach. The bathroom tiles had been scrubbed with industrial-grade cleanser. Multiple surfaces showed evidence of having been wiped down with some kind of disinfectant. Someone was trying to remove evidence, Detective Williams said to his team. But why would you clean your house before you left it? Unless you didn't want us to find something. The timeline also began revealing inconsistencies. According to the school system's records, Emma had never shown up for her classes on Friday, March 14th, but her absence hadn't been reported to her parents until Saturday morning. When the school tried to verify an absence, she had marked herself present at morning roll call, which meant she or someone accessing her account had logged into the school system Friday morning and marked her present. Similarly, James had been marked present at his school Friday morning, but he had never shown up to any of his classes. They were here Friday morning, Detective Williams realized. They had to be. Someone was here to mark them present. But Ring doorbell footage from Friday morning showed nothing. No one coming or going. The house appeared completely still. That's when they discovered the second vehicle. A neighbor, Tom Bradley, remembered seeing another car in the Hartwell driveway on Thursday evening. It was a white sedan. He didn't recognize it. He had assumed it was a friend visiting. But looking at the traffic camera footage from the street, investigators confirmed it. At 10:15 p.m. Thursday evening, a white sedan had pulled into the Hartwell driveway, but had left at 8:47 a.m. Friday morning. License plate readers captured the vehicle. But here's where it got interesting. The vehicle was registered to a corporation, a shell company registered in Delaware. It took investigators 2 days just to figure out that the car had been rented, and when they contacted the rental agency, they got their first real breakthrough. The car had been rented Thursday afternoon by someone using a credit card, but not a credit card in anyone's name that they recognized. The name on the card was Michael Patterson. When they ran that name, it didn't exist. No driver's license, no social security number, no record of anyone by that name in any database. It's a fake name, Officer Chin said. He rented the car with a fake identity. The credit card, when traced, had been purchased at a Best Buy using cash. The transaction had been recorded, and video footage from that Best Buy showed a man buying the card. But here's the problem. The man's face was carefully turned away from the camera at every moment. The footage showed someone deliberately avoiding facial recognition, someone who knew exactly how to work around surveillance systems. We're looking for someone who knows how to avoid cameras, Detective Williams said. Someone who is organized. Someone who has planned this carefully. But the question that hung over the investigation was simple. Why would someone want to kidnap the entire Hartwell family? What was the motive? And most importantly, where were they? It was Officer Sarah Chun, the same officer who had found Emma's locked bedroom, who discovered something that changed everything. It was during the third walk through the house. She was in the basement, photographing the empty space, when she noticed something on the concrete floor. It was faint. Very faint, but under the right light, you could see it. A pattern, like something had been dragged. "Detective," she called out. Detective Williams came down. He looked at the marks on the floor. His face changed. "Get the forensics team back here," he said. The marks on the floor showed evidence of heavy objects being moved. Not furniture. Something heavier. Something that required effort to drag. The forensics team analyzed the marks and determined that whatever had been dragged had left behind traces of a reddish substance. Could be blood, the forensics analyst said. But additional testing showed it wasn't blood. It was rust, metal oxidation, as if something metallic had been dragged across the basement floor. A safe? One officer suggested. Like they had a safe down here? But there was no safe anywhere in the house. More peculiar details began emerging. In Richard's office on the second floor, a small room overlooking the street where he did his structural engineering work, investigators found something odd. His computer was still there, but his backup hard drives were gone. His desk had a space where something used to sit, something about the size of a small box. He was into computers? Detective Williams asked. Not particularly. Richard's boss said when questioned. He didn't seem like a tech guy at all. He did his work, filed his reports, but he wasn't one of those computer enthusiasts. But when they examined Richard's work laptop, which he left at the office, they found something strange. His browsing history had been cleared. All of it. Every browser. Every cache. Someone had taken the time to systematically delete everything. He was covering his tracks, Detective Chin said, even his work computer. He was trying to erase his digital footprint. But why? What was Richard Hartwell hiding? And then there was the matter of the basement door. During a more careful examination, investigators realized that the basement door had been recently reinforced. The door frame was newer than the rest of the house. The lock was industrial grade. Someone had upgraded security on that door for a reason. What was down there? Detective Williams kept asking, What was in that basement that was so important that it warranted industrial-grade locks and careful security upgrades? But nothing was down there. Nothing at all. It was just an empty basement with marks on the floor where something had been dragged. The investigation was revealing a portrait of a man living a double life. A man who was careful about his digital footprint. A man who was concerned about security. A man who had secrets that he was protecting. But the question of where his family had gone remained unanswered. While the forensics team continued examining the physical evidence, the Cyber Crimes Division of the Portland Police Department began its own investigation. They were looking for digital footprints. Jennifer's email account was accessed on Friday morning at 6:13 a.m. Someone logged in and began systematically deleting emails. Hundreds of them. Years of correspondence just vanishing. But here's what made it important. The emails being deleted were primarily correspondence between Jennifer and Carol Henderson. The investigators were able to recover some of these deleted emails through backups. What they found was troubling. In one email dated 8 months prior, Jennifer had written to Carol, "I need to tell you something. Something I haven't told anyone. I found something. Something that Richard has been hiding. I don't even know how to process it. Can we talk?" Carol's response, "Of course. Come over whenever you want. You know my door is always open." But the subsequent emails in that conversation had been completely deleted. Whatever Jennifer had found, whatever she had discovered about Richard, the details had been erased. Another email dated 3 months prior. "He doesn't know that I know. I've been careful, but I'm scared. Carol, I'm really scared. I need to figure out what to do." Again, the next emails in the conversation were gone. Jennifer discovered something. Detective Williams told his team. Something about Richard, something that scared her, and someone wanted to erase the evidence of those conversations. Meanwhile, the cybercrimes team was examining Richard's digital activity, and what they found was shocking. Richard had been maintaining a second email account, an account that he had hidden carefully, using a VPN and encrypted servers. The account had been set up under the fake name Michael Patterson. That was the name used to rent the car. In this hidden email account, there were communications with someone using an encrypted email service. The messages were brief, cryptic, and clearly using coded language. One message read, "The timeline is set. Everything is prepared. Are you ready for the transition?" The response, confirmed, Friday, 8:45 p.m. Everyone will need to be compliant. No exceptions. Another exchange. "The basement is ready. Everything is in place. Once they're inside, there's no going back." The messages were from approximately 8 months prior, dating back to around July of 2018. He was planning something. Officer Chin said, staring at the screen. This wasn't spur of the moment. This was premeditated. Months of planning. But the most disturbing discovery came when the team found Richard's search history, which he had backed up in a cloud storage account. Among the searches were how to disappear without a trace, false identities and documents, untraceable vehicles, locations with no cell phone service, off-grid living communities, prepaid credit cards and cash transactions, avoiding financial tracking. But there were other searches too. Psychological searches, how to control family members, coercive control tactics, psychological manipulation techniques, how to detect if someone is planning to leave, and most chilling, what happens if family members refuse to comply, securing compliance in isolation. "Oh my God," someone on the team said quietly. He was planning to take them somewhere. Somewhere off-grid. Somewhere where no one could find them. But the question that haunted the investigation was still unanswered. Where? As the investigation expanded, detectives began interviewing everyone who had contact with the Hartwell family. Friends, co-workers, teachers, neighbors. Each conversation added another piece to an increasingly complex puzzle. Carol Henderson's testimony was particularly revealing. She described Jennifer as someone who had been growing increasingly distant over the past year. "She seemed worried," Carol said, "like she had something on her mind that she couldn't talk about. We used to talk about everything, but these last months, there was a wall between us, like she was afraid to tell me what was going on." Carol also mentioned something else, About 4 months ago, Jennifer asked me a strange question. She asked what I would do if I found out my husband wasn't who I thought he was. I didn't know what to say. I told her that I would want to know the truth, and she just looked sad. Emma's best friend, Madison Chun, provided another crucial piece of the puzzle. She mentioned that about 4 months ago, right around the time Jennifer seemed to discover something about Richard, Emma had started acting differently. She seemed scared, Madison said. Not of anything specific. Just scared, like she knew something bad was happening but couldn't talk about it. And then she tried to tell me something once. She said, "Don't trust people just because they're family." And I asked her what she meant, but she wouldn't say. Madison also revealed that Emma had asked her about safe houses, shelters, places where you could go if you needed to run away. She was asking like it was hypothetical, Madison said, but it felt like it wasn't hypothetical. It felt like she was trying to figure out how to leave. James's friend, a boy named Tyler Winters, provided perhaps the most unsettling testimony. James told me something once. Tyler said, he said his dad had been acting weird. He said he was building something in the basement, and he didn't want anyone going down there. And he said his dad had given him and Emma the same speech. He told them that no matter what happened, they needed to be ready to leave on short notice, that they needed to be prepared to do what he said without asking questions. When was this? Detective Williams asked. Maybe 3 months ago. After that, James stopped talking about it, like he was scared to talk about it. The interviews painted a disturbing picture. Richard Hartwell had been planning something for months. His family was aware of it, or at least aware that something was wrong. Jennifer had discovered something that frightened her. The children had been put on alert. And then on March 14th, everyone had simply disappeared. But the most important question remained. Where had they gone? And was Richard taking them somewhere against their will? By day 4 of the investigation, Detective Williams and his team had constructed a detailed timeline of what appeared to have happened on the night of March 13th and the early morning of March 14th. 6:43 p.m. Richard's Ring doorbell footage shows him arriving home from work. 6:50 p.m. Family is observed having dinner, based on visible movement through window. 8:12 p.m. Delivery to the front porch, routine weekly delivery. 9:30 p.m. Internal security camera shows a family in the house. Lights are on throughout. 10:15 p.m. White sedan, rented under fake name Michael Patterson, arrives at the driveway. 10:47 p.m. Neighbor Marilyn Cross sees lights on in the house. Everything appears normal. 2 a.m. March 14th. Forensics team would later determine that the basement lock has been recently used based on wear patterns. 6:15 a.m. Someone logs into the school system and marks both Emma and James present. 6:13 a.m. Jennifer's email account is accessed, and emails begin being deleted. 7:45 a.m. A transaction is recorded at a gas station approximately 40 miles from the house. The credit card used is the same prepaid card registered to Michael Patterson. 8:47 a.m. White sedan leaves the Hartwell driveway. 8:52 a.m. Traffic camera records the white sedan heading toward the interstate, moving north. They left early in the morning, Detective Chin said, before dawn, before people would notice, before the school would call to report the absences. But where were they going? The gas station that had recorded the transaction was on Highway 101, heading north, but that led in multiple directions. You could continue north toward Washington State. You could head east on various roads. You could go in 1,000 different directions. Detective Williams filed an emergency warrant to track the prepaid credit card. Within hours, they had a list of transactions. 9:23 a.m., gas station, 40 miles north, Highway 101. 11:47 a.m., restaurant, fast food chain. Order to go, 1:15 p.m., gas station, approximately 80 miles north, 4:30 p.m., grocery store, cash purchase, amount unknown due to transaction processing. 5:45 p.m., gas station, approximately 140 miles north. The trail went cold after that. No more transactions. They switched payment methods. One detective suggested cash only after that. But Detective Williams was looking at the map differently. He was tracking the vector. They were moving north. The pattern suggested they were heading toward isolated areas, rural communities, places off the beaten path. They were heading into wilderness, he said, somewhere remote, somewhere they couldn't be easily found. But it was a massive area, hundreds of square miles, tens of thousands of possible locations. The Oregon State Police launched a search operation, but searching for 4 people who'd only found in over 10,000 square miles of mountainous, forested terrain is not easy. Days passed. A week passed. 2 weeks passed. The search continued, but nothing was found. By day 12 of the investigation, the case had gone cold. There were no new leads. The trail had simply disappeared, literally and figuratively. But then, on March 26, an anonymous tip came in. The call came into the Portland Police Department at 3:47 p.m. on March 26, exactly 12 days after the family had disappeared. The caller was using a voice modulator. The voice was distorted, impossible to recognize, but the information was specific. There's a property, the voice said, in the Cascade Mountains, about 2 hours north of Portland. It's registered under a shell company called Ascension Properties. Richard Hartwell owns it through a series of corporate structures that are designed to hide his ownership. But he owns it, and he's been making payments on it for over 2 years using encrypted cryptocurrency transactions. How do you know this? Detective Williams asked the anonymous caller. The line went dead, but the tip was valuable, very valuable. Within hours, Detective Williams had obtained a warrant to investigate Ascension Properties. What they found was remarkable. The property existed. It consisted of 40 acres of land in a remote area of the Cascade Mountains, approximately 110 miles north of Portland. The land had been purchased approximately 2 years prior using a complex web of LLC formations and shell companies designed to hide ownership. But forensics analysts tracing the corporate paperwork found one constant. All of the corporations were managed using an email address. That email address was registered to Michael Patterson. Richard was planning this, Officer Chin said, for over 2 years. This wasn't something he decided on a whim. This was a long-term plan. The property itself was mostly undeveloped forest, but satellite imagery from the past year showed construction activity. Something was being built, something underground, based on the way the forest canopy was disturbed. A physical search team was organized. On March 27th, 48 hours after the anonymous tip, they drove to the property. What they found changed everything. The search team followed GPS coordinates provided by the property ownership records. They hiked through dense forest for nearly 2 miles before they found it. It was a structure, almost completely underground, a compound of sorts, built into the side of a hill. The entrance was concealed by carefully constructed camouflage, branches, dirt, and custom-designed barriers that would be invisible to someone passing by. But once you knew it was there, it was obvious. The entrance was a reinforced door, sealed. But when the team examined it, they found something disturbing. On the inside of the door, there were locks, multiple locks, heavy-duty locks, the kind of locks designed to keep people in, not keep intruders out. Detective Williams felt his stomach tighten. "They're here," he said quietly. "They're here somewhere." The team used equipment to carefully cut through the door. They didn't want to damage any evidence, but they also didn't know what they were about to find, so they were cautious, prepared for anything. When the door opened, the smell hit them first. Something thick and stale. Recycled air. The smell of a space that hadn't been exposed to fresh air in a long time. They found a bunker, a sophisticated underground shelter. It was approximately 3,000 square feet, divided into sections. There was a living area with couches and chairs, a kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, and then in the back, something that made every officer's blood run cold. A cage, a metal cage, approximately 12 feet by 12 feet, with a reinforced door and a lock. Inside the cage was evidence of occupation, a mattress, blankets, a bucket for use as a toilet. "Oh my God," one officer said quietly, but the cage was empty. No one was inside. The team searched the entire compound carefully, documenting everything. What they found was a snapshot of life in captivity, books and games in the living area, suggesting attempts to maintain mental health, a bathroom with supplies, A kitchen with preserved food and water, but also restraints, handcuffs, chains, evidence of confinement. On the wall of the main living area, something was written in chalk. A message. It read, "Obedience equals survival, resistance equals consequences. This is our new reality." Jesus Christ, Detective Williams whispered. But where were they? The team searched the compound for clues. And in the bedroom area, they found something crucial. A journal. It was partially burned, as if someone had tried to destroy it. But pages were still readable. The handwriting was Jennifer's. The remaining legible entries read, March 14th. I don't even understand what's happening. When he told us we had to go with him, I thought he was joking, but he had this look. A look I've never seen before. He said we had a choice, go willingly or he would make us go. He said there was a life he had been preparing for us, a place where we could all be together, away from the distractions of the outside world. When I refused, when I told him this was insane, he showed us the cage. He told me that Emma or James would be locked in the cage if we didn't comply. I had no choice. I had to make them go with him. March 16th, we've been here 3 days. Richard won't let us leave the compound. He says we're adjusting. He says this is for our own good. He feeds us, but he watches us constantly. He won't let us be alone. He won't let us leave the main area. He says once we accept this, everything will be different. Emma is terrified. James is withdrawn. I'm trying to stay strong for them, but I'm falling apart. March 20th. He's getting worse. His mood swings are unpredictable. One moment he's kind, almost fatherly. The next moment he's angry, accusing us of not being grateful enough, accusing us of wanting to go back to the outside world. He says the outside world was poisoning us. He says here with him, we can be a real family. But this isn't a family. This is a prison. The entry is cut off there. The rest of the journal had been burned. Detective Williams was shaking. This wasn't a disappearance. This was a kidnapping. A crime of coercive control. Richard Hartwell had forcibly taken his family to a hidden compound and imprisoned them there. But the compound was empty. Where had they gone? The search team expanded their investigation. They searched the surrounding forest. They found something. A trail, relatively fresh, leading deeper into the woods. As if someone had fled, Detective Williams made a decision. They had to follow that trail. The trail led deeper into the forest, away from the compound, heading generally toward the southwest. It appeared to have been used multiple times, suggesting recent activity. A team of 5 officers, including Detective Williams and Officer Chun, followed the trail. They were well equipped for forest travel, GPS units, communication devices, emergency supplies. But as they went deeper into the wilderness, they felt increasingly cut off from the rest of the world. The trail eventually led to a smaller structure, another bunker, but much less developed, more of a shelter. It appeared to be used occasionally, not permanently inhabited. Inside, they found supplies, food, water, blankets, and on a wall, something written in pencil. Mom, if you're reading this, know that I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't stop him. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. But he's getting worse every day. I think he's going to hurt someone. I think he's going to hurt you. I'm going to try to get out. I'm going to try to get help. If I don't come back, know that I tried. The handwriting was Emma's. Detective Williams felt cold dread wash over him. Emma had fled. She had written this note to her mother, suggesting that she was planning an escape. But when, and had she made it? The trail continued from the shelter, heading toward what appeared to be a hiking trail that would eventually lead to civilization. Detective Williams made the decision to follow it. What they found, approximately 3.5 miles from the shelter, was a piece of Emma's jacket. It was torn, caught on a branch. There were drops of blood on it. Fresh blood, not old, recent. She was injured, Officer Chin said. She was running and she was hurt. Detective Williams radioed for additional resources. Helicopters, search dogs. A full search and rescue operation was initiated in that area. But finding one injured teenager in the wilderness was like finding a needle in a haystack. Hours passed. The search continued through the evening and into the night. Thermal imaging cameras were deployed. Search dogs were brought in, but nothing was found. By 2 a.m. on March 28th, nearly 18 hours after finding the jacket piece, Detective Williams was sitting in the command center of the search operation, exhausted, frustrated, and terrified. Emma Hartwell had escaped her father. She had fled into the wilderness, injured, and now she was missing. But at 3:30 a.m., a ranger station approximately 8 miles from the shelter received a call. A teenage girl, wet, cold, and injured, had staggered out of the forest. She was asking for help. She was asking for police. Her name was Emma Hartwell. Emma Hartwell was hypothermic, dehydrated, and severely injured, but she was alive. She was transported immediately to the nearest hospital, a 45-minute drive from the ranger station, where she was treated for exposure, dehydration, and a lacerated left arm. As soon as she was stable enough to talk, Detective Williams was allowed to interview her. Emma was 16 years old, but sitting in that hospital bed, she looked much older. Her eyes had a haunted quality. She was trembling, not from the cold anymore, but from the trauma. "My father," she said quietly, "is not who you think he is." What Emma revealed over the next 3 hours would fundamentally change the investigation and explain the mystery of what had happened to the Hartwell family. According to Emma, Richard Hartwell had been planning his underground compound for over 2 years. He had been preparing for what he called the transition. What transition meant, Emma didn't fully understand, but it involved taking the family away from society. He was obsessed with it, Emma said. He had books everywhere about survival, about off-grid living, about how society was going to collapse. He was convinced that the world outside was dangerous. He was convinced that we needed to be protected from it. And more than that, he was convinced that he was the only one who could protect us. Emma explained that Richard had gradually been tightening his control over the family. He had isolated them. He had monitored their communications. He had restricted their activities, all in the name of preparing them. "My mom figured out," Emma said. She found his journals. She found out about the property. She found out about the compound. And she was going to leave him. She was going to take James and me, and she was going to go to the police. But then he found out she knew. Emma paused, and tears began streaming down her face. He told her that if she tried to leave, he would hurt one of us. He said he would lock James in the cage in the compound, and we would have to watch. He said he would hurt us if she didn't cooperate. So she agreed. She agreed to go with him, to get us to the compound. She was trying to protect us. She was trying to keep us safe. "When did you escape?" Detective Williams asked quietly. 4 days after we got to the compound, on March 18th. My dad was becoming increasingly unstable. He was having these mood swings, moments of tenderness, followed by moments of extreme anger. One moment he was telling my mom he loved her, and the next moment he was screaming at her about how ungrateful she was. He was getting more and more controlling. And I realized that if I didn't get out, if I didn't get help, something terrible was going to happen. "What do you mean, something terrible?" Detective Williams asked, though he had an idea. Emma looked at him with those haunted eyes. "I think he was going to hurt my mother," she said quietly. "I think he was going to hurt my brother. And I think the cage was eventually going to be used on my mom." Detective Williams felt his hands clenching into fists. "Where's your mother now? Where's James?" Emma shook her head slowly. "I don't know. My father, he said he was taking them somewhere else. That the compound was just temporary. That he had a plan, a bigger plan, to create a community somewhere. A place where people like him could live without having to follow society's rules. He said my mom and James were going to be part of that. But I don't know where. I don't know where he took them after I left." Detective Williams felt the weight of that statement. Emma had escaped. Yes, but her mother and brother were still missing, still with Richard, still at his mercy. "I need you to help us find them," Detective Williams said. "I need you to tell me everything you remember about your father's plans. Everything." And Emma did. Over the next 6 hours, she provided investigators with detailed information about Richard's plans, his ideology, his contacts. Richard, she revealed, had been part of an online community. People who believed in off-grid living, in separating themselves from mainstream society. But within that community, there was a darker element, People who were preaching what they called radical family autonomy, the idea that parents should have absolute power over their families, that they could essentially create their own societies within the family unit, free from government interference. Richard had connected with a man named David Sinclair. Sinclair was a self-proclaimed family advisor who taught what he called coercive family restructuring, essentially kidnapping family members and psychologically manipulating them into compliance. Sinclair had written a manuscript. Emma had seen fragments of it in Richard's study. It outlined a plan for creating what he called family compounds, where parents could maintain absolute control over their family members, isolated from the outside world. Sinclair was mentoring my father, Emma said, telling him how to do this, how to manipulate us, how to control us. My father was talking about creating a compound community, eventually, where multiple families would live under the system. Detective Williams felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about one disturbed man and his family. This was potentially part of a larger network, a larger movement. Do you know where your father was taking your mother and James? Emma thought hard. He mentioned a place, she said slowly. He mentioned it like it was really important. A compound. He called it the sanctuary. He said it was in Northern California, in the mountains somewhere. He said that was where the real community was. That was where he was eventually going to take all of us. The sanctuary, Detective Williams repeated. Do you know anything more about it? Just that it was Sinclair's project. That Sinclair was building it. That eventually, my father wanted to be part of it, but he wanted to make sure we were ready first. That we were compliant. Detective Williams stood up and left the room immediately. He had work to do. With information provided by Emma, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Federal agents became involved. The FBI opened a case. This was no longer just a local missing persons case. This was potentially a federal matter involving organized coercive control and kidnapping across state lines. Agents traced David Sinclair. What they found was a complicated, twisted history. Sinclair was 53 years old. He had been arrested twice, once for assault and once for false imprisonment, but had never been convicted because the victims, in both cases, had refused to testify or had recanted their statements. Classic victim behavior. One FBI profiler explained, victims of prolonged coercive control often defend their abusers. They become psychologically dependent on them. They're afraid to testify because they've been conditioned to believe that the abuser is the only person who can protect them. Sinclair had been writing and publishing online content about what he called family sovereignty for approximately 5 years. He had built a following. Not huge, maybe a few hundred people online, but dedicated followers who were reading his material and, in some cases, implementing his methods. Richard Hartwell had discovered this community approximately 3 years prior and had become a devoted follower. He had paid Sinclair for private consulting. He had purchased Sinclair's manuscript. He had paid for what Sinclair called family restructuring training. But more importantly, investigators found communications between Richard and Sinclair discussing the transition. In one email exchange, Richard, I'm ready. Jennifer is starting to catch on, so I need to move forward with a plan. Sinclair, patience. Preparation is key. You must be ready before you initiate. Once you take them, there's no going back. They must be fully isolated, and you must be mentally prepared to maintain control for as long as necessary. Richard, how long will it take for full compliance? Sinclair, with adults, typically 3 to 6 months. With children, it depends on the child. Some are naturally compliant. Others need more time. Emma may be a challenge. She's strong-willed. You may need to use stronger measures. The email didn't specify what stronger measures meant, but the implication was clear. Agents tracked Sinclair's location. He was operating out of property in Northern California, approximately 200 miles north of the Oregon compound. The property was registered under yet another shell company, but this one was larger. It was over 150 acres. Satellite imagery showed multiple structures on the property, multiple buildings, evidence of significant construction activity over the past 2 years. He's building it, FBI agent Patricia Torres said. He's building his community, his compound, the sanctuary. An undercover operation was planned. Agents would approach the property under the guise of being interested in joining Sinclair's community. They would gather intelligence. But before the operation could be launched, something happened. On March 29th, the morning after Emma had given her statement, detectives discovered something in the Cascade compound that they had initially missed: a calendar. Richard had been keeping track of time. He had marked days off on a physical calendar. But more importantly, he had made notes. Written in his own hand were destinations and dates. March 14th, take family to compound. March 14th to 17th, integration period. March 18th, Emma escape, deviation from plan. March 20th, depart for sanctuary. March 29th, arrival at sanctuary expected. The date, March 29th, was circled. That day was today. Richard was supposed to be arriving at Sinclair's compound today. They're in transit right now, Detective Williams said urgently. Or they're already there. We need to move now. An emergency warrant was obtained. Federal agents and law enforcement from both Oregon and California coordinated a simultaneous operation targeting both the Cascade compound and Sinclair's property in Northern California. But there was a problem. Sinclair's property was large, 150 acres. There were multiple buildings. And if Richard and Jennifer and James were already there, they could be anywhere on the property. Worse, the initial approach to the property revealed something troubling. There was heavy security. Fences, gates, armed guards. Whatever Sinclair had built, he had prepared to defend it. The operation was carefully coordinated. Agents didn't want to storm the property and risk the lives of Jennifer and James. But they also couldn't wait indefinitely. At 2:15 p.m. Pacific time on March 29th, federal agents approached the main gate of the property. They were in unmarked vehicles, and they were attempting to look casual. But as soon as they were close enough to be recognized as law enforcement, something happened. An alarm sounded. Literally an alarm. It was as if Sinclair had been expecting them. What happened next was captured on the helicopters that were hovering above the property, monitoring the situation. People began moving quickly across the grounds. Vehicles were being prepared. There were multiple buildings, and people were being moved between them. "He's trying to flee," someone on the radio said. The agents rushed the gate. They cut through the lock and drove onto the property. But Sinclair's compound wasn't some ramshackle wilderness camp. It was organized. It was sophisticated. And the people inside knew how to move quickly. By the time agents reached the main building, several vehicles had already left the property through a back exit onto a Forest Service road. "We got vehicles fleeing," someone reported. 3 vehicles heading northeast. "Are the Hartwells in those vehicles?" the commanding officer asked. "We don't know yet. We're still searching the compound." What agents found in the compound was disturbing. There were 7 separate living quarters, evidence that multiple families had been staying there. The main building had detailed records, files, lists of names, financial accounts. But most importantly, they found evidence that Jennifer and James had been there. A notebook with Jennifer's name on it. Inside were dates, descriptions. It was a log, a record of Richard's control over Jennifer. Entries like, March 28th, Jennifer showed resistance to the new rules, corrected her behavior by restricting meals. She accepted the correction. March 27th, James attempting to maintain loyalty to outside world. Remove his access to books not approved by Sinclair. He's adjusting. March 26th, Jennifer tried to communicate with other women at the compound. I reminded her that her only loyalty should be to me. She accepted this. It was a psychological abuse log, a record of how Richard was systematically breaking down his family's resistance. But Jennifer and James weren't in the compound. They had apparently been taken. "We need to stop those vehicles," FBI agent Torres said urgently. A manhunt was initiated immediately. 3 vehicles fleeing the compound, heading northeast on Forest Service roads. Multiple agencies coordinating to intercept them. State troopers from California were positioned at the nearest highway. But the vehicles had a head start, and they were moving through terrain that Sinclair and Richard presumably knew well. For 37 minutes, there was nothing but frantic radio chatter. Officers trying to close in, helicopters attempting to track the vehicles. But the forest was dense, and the vehicles were moving fast. Then at 2:52 p.m., one of the vehicles crashed. It ran into a tree after taking a turn too fast. 2 people were in the vehicle. Neither was Jennifer or James. At 3:04 p.m., a second vehicle was spotted on a forest highway approximately 18 miles from the compound. Law enforcement attempted to pull over. The driver, identified as David Sinclair himself, refused to stop and accelerated. What followed was a high-speed chase through mountain roads. Sinclair was driving erratically, dangerously. He was clearly trying to escape. At 3:15 p.m., a law enforcement vehicle managed to force Sinclair's car off the road. The vehicle crashed into a ravine. It was a devastating crash. By all rights, the occupant should have been severely injured or killed. Sinclair survived, barely, but he was severely injured. He was airlifted by helicopter to a hospital. The third vehicle was never found on the forest roads. It had apparently gone a different direction. "Where's the third vehicle?" The FBI commander asked urgently. "Where is Richard Hartwell?" What they discovered through emergency cell phone tracking was that the third vehicle had driven not northeast, but south, back toward Oregon, back toward the original compound. "He's going back to the compound," Detective Williams said, understanding immediately. "He thinks we haven't searched there thoroughly. Or he has somewhere else to go from there." By 4:30 p.m., law enforcement had established a perimeter around the Cascade compound. Helicopters were overhead. State troopers were in position. But Richard Hartwell didn't go to the compound. Instead, he drove past it, heading toward the nearest small town, a town called Belmont. Population 3,200. He drove into the downtown area. And then, inexplicably, he drove directly to the local police station. He parked the vehicle. He turned off the engine. And then he sat there, waiting. When officers approached the vehicle cautiously, they found Richard Hartwell in the driver's seat. Jennifer was in the passenger seat, frightened but physically unharmed. James was in the back seat, emotionally withdrawn but alive. Richard Hartwell didn't resist. He didn't try to run. He simply sat there, waiting for the officers to arrive. "I need help," Richard said quietly as officers opened his door. "I've done something terrible, and I need help." Richard Hartwell was arrested and taken into custody. Jennifer and James were immediately taken to a hospital to be checked for injuries and trauma. Over the next 48 hours, Richard was interrogated by federal agents and detectives. What he confessed was comprehensive and devastating. He admitted to kidnapping his family. He admitted to imprisoning them in the underground compound. He admitted to psychologically abusing them. He admitted to planning to take them to Sinclair's compound, where they would have been subject to permanent isolation and control. But more than that, he confessed to the deeper motivations. He had been radicalized, he said, by Sinclair's ideology. He had become convinced that traditional society was toxic and destructive. He had believed that by taking his family and isolating them, he was saving them. "Sinclair made me see the truth," Richard said in one of the interrogations. "He showed me that families don't need society. They need discipline. They need structure. They need a father figure who can guide them and protect them from the corruption of the outside world." "And what happened when your family didn't want to be protected?" Detective Williams asked. Richard was silent for a long moment. "Then I had to make them understand," he said finally. "I had to use methods that Sinclair had taught me. Isolation, restriction, psychological pressure. Once they understood that I was the only person they could rely on, that I was the only person who truly loved them, they would accept their new reality." The psychological evaluation of Richard Hartwell revealed a man who became completely detached from reality. He wasn't insane in a legal sense. He understood the nature of his actions. But he had been so completely influenced by Sinclair's ideology that he had genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. "He's a true believer," one psychologist said. "He's not a typical kidnapper motivated by greed or revenge. He's someone who has been indoctrinated into a belief system, and he was acting according to that system." Jennifer's account, once she was safe and able to talk, was heartbreaking. "I didn't recognize him," she told Detective Williams. "My husband of 20 years, and I didn't recognize him. This man in the compound, he was so different from the person I married. It was like he had been replaced by someone else, someone cold, someone capable of terrible things. She described the psychological manipulation, how Richard had created a system of reward and punishment, how he had isolated her from James and Emma, preventing them from having private conversations, how he had rewritten the rules of the family, making himself absolute authority. He told me that he loved me, but that love meant obedience, Jennifer said. He said that if I truly loved him, I would understand that everything he was doing was for our own good. And the worst part was, there were moments when I almost believed him. When I was tired enough or isolated enough, I almost started believing that he was right. James, the youngest, was severely traumatized. He had been 9 days in the compound and 3 days in the vehicle with his father. He had witnessed his father's control over his mother. He had seen the cage. He had understood, at some level, what would have happened to him if he had resisted. He's going to need years of therapy, one psychologist said. He's a child who has been shown the capacity of a parent to betray them in the most fundamental way possible. The aftermath of the Hartwell case was far-reaching and profound. Richard Hartwell was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, child abuse, and multiple counts of coercive control. He eventually pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. He will be 89 years old before he's eligible for parole. David Sinclair was charged with 14 counts of kidnapping, conspiracy, and other federal offenses related to his sanctuary compound. Investigators found that there were not one but 7 families being held at the compound under similar circumstances. Over 30 people had been subject to Sinclair's coercive control. Sinclair survived his injuries from the crash. He faced trial, and despite his lawyer's attempt to paint him as someone providing an alternative lifestyle option, the evidence was overwhelming. He was convicted and sentenced to 60 years in federal prison. But the impact of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. The exposure of Sinclair's network led to federal investigations into similar communities across the country. It was discovered that there were at least 3 other communities operating under similar ideologies, all connected to Sinclair's online presence and teachings. Laws were changed. Several states passed new legislation specifically targeting coercive control within families. A federal task force was created to monitor online communities that were promoting what law enforcement called radical family ideology. Emma Hartwell became a public advocate for victims of coercive control. She founded an organization to help people escape abusive family situations and psychological manipulation. She testified before Congress about the dangers of online radicalization and how ideologies like Sinclair's could infiltrate homes and destroy families. My father wasn't evil in the way that people typically think of evil, Emma said during her testimony. He was a man who was radicalized by an ideology that promised him total control, and he was willing to destroy his family to achieve that control. Jennifer Hartwell and James Hartwell have largely kept out of the public eye, choosing instead to focus on their healing and recovery. But in interviews, Jennifer has spoken about the dangers of isolation in relationships. I was so focused on being a good wife, on being supportive, that I didn't notice how much my husband was pulling away from the world, she said. I didn't notice how his beliefs were becoming more extreme. And by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. We were trapped. The case also highlighted the growing danger of online radicalization, how a person can be pulled into a belief system through the internet, how that belief system can escalate their behavior, how they can become capable of things they would have never imagined before. As of today, this is the status of the key figures in the Hartwell case. Richard Hartwell is serving his 45-year sentence in a federal penitentiary in Colorado. He maintains that he did nothing wrong, that he was following Sinclair's teachings, and that society is a problem, not him. He has written letters to his wife and children, which they have not opened. He has made no genuine apology. David Sinclair died in prison in 2024. He died of a heart attack at the age of 55. He never showed remorse for his actions. To the end, he maintained that his ideology was correct and that society was a corrupt one. Jennifer Hartwell has rebuilt her life. She left Portland and moved to a small town in Northern California. She no longer works as a librarian, but instead runs a small bookstore. She has written a memoir about her experience, which was published in 2023. It became a bestseller, and many of the proceeds have gone to organizations that help victims of abuse. In the book, she writes about the moment she realized her husband was no longer the man she had married. It was a moment of horror, she says, but also a moment of clarity, because that's when she understood that she had to act, that she had to protect her children, that she had to be brave even when she was terrified. James Hartwell, now 18, is a freshman in college. He's studying psychology, specifically focusing on trauma and recovery. He's still working with therapists, but he's made remarkable progress. He maintains contact with his sister Emma, and the two have a close relationship, bonded by what they experienced. Emma Hartwell, now 20, has taken a gap year after high school to focus on her advocacy work. She's decided to defer college for another year as she builds her organization helping victims of coercive control. Her dream is to eventually become a psychologist herself, so she can help other people navigate the aftermath of psychological trauma. When asked if she's angry at her father, Emma says something that might surprise you. "I'm not angry," she says. "I'm sad. I'm sad that he got lost in an ideology. I'm sad that he couldn't see what he was doing to us. I'm sad that he's never going to understand the damage he caused. And I'm sad that there are probably other people right now, other families, being subjected to the same things that we went through, because there are people out there like David Sinclair who are teaching this ideology." But despite her sadness, Emma is hopeful, because her family survived, not unscathed. The scars are deep, and the healing will take years. But they survived, and they're rebuilding, and they're using their experience to help others. The Hartwell family is a story that reminds us of something important. That evil doesn't always look the way we expect it to. That danger can come from within our own homes, from people we love and trust. That ideology can blind us to cruelty. And that recovery, while difficult, is possible. They are a family that was broken and is slowly rebuilding itself. They are a family that was imprisoned and has reclaimed their freedom. They are a family that has become a warning and a beacon. And that is the true story of what happened to the Hartwell family. On March 14th, 2019, a whole family disappeared. And when investigators finally found them, they discovered something that left them changed forever. Not because of the crime itself, but because of what it revealed about human nature, about how easy it is for good people to be led astray, about how susceptible we are to ideologies that promise certainty in an uncertain world, about how important it is to question, to remain connected to those we love, and to never allow anyone, no matter how much we trust them, to have complete control over our lives. This is what the investigators found. This is what left them speechless.